Hi everyone, good morning for some of you and good afternoon to others. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on today's webinar, Rise of the Bot Agent. My name's Tom Platt. Just first of all, just wanted to give you a couple of introductions. So as I said, my name's Tom Platt. I head up product sales here at Intechnica, have done for a while. I work with a range of our clients across various sectors, including some people in the travel space. I'm very fortunate today to be joined by our CTO and co-founder, Andy Still. Andy Still is a published author with experience of building highly performant and scalable systems, having worked with businesses such as Carnex, Late Rooms and Avis. He's got quite a bit of insight into the travel space as well, so really fortunate to be joined by him today. In terms of just giving you a little bit of background before going too far, how have we got this information, why are we interested? So effectively, Traffic Defender was built getting on for 3 or 4 years ago now, and we built what was at the time and still is considered to be the industry-leading visitor management solution, all about helping people control and manage their websites, sort of peaks in traffic. We were in a very fortunate position to sit in front of multiple websites all around the world from some of the world's leading brands. And what we found when we did that 3 years ago was that people didn't have too much visibility into their website traffic effectively, and people would tell us they'd be expecting a certain number of visitors, and what we'd see is those visitors quite often drive a much higher kind of CPU usage and number of requests than would be expected. So very early on, we sat in a privileged position having data from some of the world's biggest brands all around the world, and we found that there is a really large amount of non-human traffic, which led us to build our bot control product, which we won't touch on today, but just to give you a bit of visibility in terms of why we're interested, what experience we do have. We do sit in front of thousands of websites every day, helping them protect the site, so we get quite a lot of visibility into what's actually going on out there. In terms of an agenda today, obviously we just covered off some introductions. First of all, I'm just going to go into a little bit of background. We work completely cross-sector here in the Traffic Defender product and at Intechnica, but I think travel is certainly one of the most interesting sectors we're involved in, given the really high rate of change, growth, and things going on in that industry. So I'm going to cover off a little bit of the background and change and why that's impacting the makeup of traffic that people are seeing on the sites. Then I'm going to hand over to our CTO, Andy Still, who's going to discuss in a little bit more detail bots and non-human traffic, what that looks like, what it's actually doing. Before we move on to some real data, so we're going to give you kind of an anonymized case study with some of the data we've collected from various sites in the travel sector in terms of how bots are having an impact on their website, what they're doing, and what it means to their business. So we're going to show you some real world data, and we're going to end on just discussing the solutions in general that are out there for people to manage non-human traffic. Followed up by a Q&A. So we will be doing a Q&A session at the end. If anyone does have any questions that they would like to raise, please do send them over to us. You've got the questions bar at the side. At any point through the webinar, if you feel like a question that you want answered, just chuck that in there, and we will cover all those off at the end. I do expect, just in terms of timekeeping, that the webinar is going to run for about 40 minutes before we get to the Q&A, so plenty of time there. So if anyone does have any questions, do feel free to submit them. So without further ado, I just want to cover off a little bit of background in terms of what we're seeing. So, I mean, essentially the travel industry is a fascinating industry for us to be involved with. It's certainly one of the most evolving industries that are out there, and there's been plenty of disruption, and there still is plenty of disruptors in that space making a real difference. Right from when we saw the first sale of online flight tickets in 1995 on ITN, we've seen real big changes. OTAs like Expedia and Last Minute really changing the game, really changing the model of sort of travel sales for a lot of people in the business. 2004 was a particularly interesting year for disruption when we saw the launch of people like Priceline launching meta search. So meta search had a real impact on what travel retailers were seeing on their sites. Followed by, we've kind of seen a little bit of a consolidation in terms of people going to member sites, offering people privileges, really trying to get closer to the customer. That sort of started with the launch of things like Voyage Privé, secret sales. etc. And then one thing that isn't really specific to the travel sector, but is general, sort of caused a real disruption. Obviously, things like the launch of the iPhone. I was reading only the other day that about 30% of all bookings are now made on mobile devices now. So a real disruptor there in the sector. You know, the launch of the iPhone and the rise of bookings on mobile. And you know, we're seeing that increase 1% pretty much quarter by quarter as well at the moment. More recently, we've had things like Airbnb, sort of the launch of peer-to-peer accommodation, have a real big impact on the industry. I think one final thing I wanted to cover off before talking about some of the latest changes. Obviously, we've seen Google launch Google Flights. This had a real impact on the industry, just enabling the customer to get closer and quicker access to data. So, you know, Google Flights is used by sort of between 38 to 50% of all travelers now to get information on the travel. So again, a really big disruption there. And what we're seeing all of this disruption means, you know, things like meta search, when we add on mobile phones, when we add on the rise of the online OTAs, it is all really impacting the type and the nature of the traffic that the core, you know, airline or the core travel site, you know, hotel is actually seeing on their website, because the visitor effectively is now no longer just someone Googling your site, but it could be someone coming from a referring OTA, it could be coming someone from meta search, it could be someone on phone or a different device, and even moving forward we could see that being various different things, which we're going to cover off in a minute. So real big change in the industry, and you know, where there's change, there's always been opportunity. You know, it's forecast, the industry's forecast to grow to $817.5 billion by 2020. So we've seen a real increase in the amount of business happening online for travel, which represents a great opportunity. And we've also seen, you know, online bookings have increased over the last year from 40.6 million to 64 million bookings. So, you know, real big change in the industry. And you know, one thing we're seeing, you know, not just in the travel sector, is that, you know, if you don't evolve and you don't move with the times, we certainly have seen, you know, the change in the customer loyalty, meaning that businesses just aren't lasting as long. You can see here the stat here, you know, businesses in the Fortune 500 used to be around on average for 75 years. Now we're seeing that's looking at more like 15 years, and that's getting shorter and shorter as people don't manage to keep up with the trend. So, you know, really important for travel businesses to continue to embrace the change in the industry, which has led to some real growth and is going to lead to some real opportunities going forward. I obviously spoke about some of the major things that have had an impact on people's traffic previously, but what's actually happening now, just wanted to do a real sort of quick look into what's actually happening. And you know, you're seeing, you know, local retailers here like On the Beach, really good sort of example of a UK OTA making a difference, and they've launched their Alison question bot, where you can go on and you can ask Alison questions, she can feedback. So they've started with the sort of AI and the machine learning curve. You've got people like Skyscanner, so not just on their site, but Skyscanner now have a chatbot that you can communicate through Facebook with, and you've got people like Kayak who are integrating with Slack, so there's loads of chatbots there as well. So what we're seeing is a real rise in automation, machine learning, and chatbots in the travel industry. Pretty much everyone we're speaking to at the moment, you know, if they're not asking about it, they're doing it. They're talking about chatbots, and this is everyone from pretty much small companies, new startups in Silicon Valley, to, you know, the likes of Expedia and Facebook, all getting into the sort of automation game in travel. So, you know, this we expect to have a real further impact on the traffic that travel sites are seeing. So obviously we're seeing the move to OTAs, referral sites, third parties, then meta search, then mobile devices. To layer on top of that, we could start having travel searches hitting your site from a chatbot, which has taken place on Facebook, or even further down the line, we could start to see the introduction of Amazon Echo and voice technology starting to change things even further. So certainly lots of change going on that we expect to continue to evolve the makeup of traffic that people are seeing on their websites. So obviously that was all very sort of high level in terms of what's going on. What does that mean for a modern sort of travel retailer today, be they an OTA, a hotel, or an airline? You know, this is some data we've collected. This is just a sort of look preview of what we're going to show you later. But one of the sites we looked at here was receiving 42% of their traffic was non-human traffic. So a real large amount of their traffic coming from other sources, not humans, not normal people making a booking on a computer anymore, but certainly loads of other different things going on. And as I said, we're very privileged here to work across a number of different sectors, and I would say across other sectors such as digital publishing, e-commerce, traditional retailing. We're seeing anywhere between 50 to 30% of their traffic being made up of non-human. But as the more and more travel retailers we work with, we're seeing that they have a significant amount more non-human traffic, and this problem's also compounded for people in this space. So if you're a retailer and you've got price scraping going on your site, quite often it's very easy to either block it because you don't want your competitors to see your price, or allow it because you're on some third-party engines. What we're seeing now is we've been speaking to people who have almost too many to count referring parties, up to the thousands, and for an airline, about 15 to 30% of their revenue can actually come from this non-human traffic. So not only do you have more of it, but a lot of it's really key to your revenue. So you can't just take the traditional approach to blocking things, the firewall approach. So really big challenge for you guys in this sector. Obviously, we've also seen some real big advancements in terms of legal and what's going on. I know there's people from around the globe on today's webinar, so I wanted to touch on this on two fronts. Apologies for any countries that I do actually miss out, but here in the EU, we have seen people, the likes of Ryanair and EasyJet, sort of set the stall out in terms of setting legal precedent for taking people to court. Obviously, Ryanair have won judgments against the likes of eDreams and WeGo, and they're currently filing papers against Expedia, so that there is a legal precedent for people here, if they don't want their sites to be scraped, to stop it here in the EU. And we're also seeing that sort of start to creep over into the States. We didn't really dig too much out in terms of the travel sector, but we have seen Craigslist been really aggressive and really successful in taking people who scrape their site content to court and win big, £60 million judgment against Radpad very recently. So, that precedent's also starting to be set in the States as well. Whether or not we'll see that creep into the travel industry will be interesting to see. So, just trying to set a little bit of the scene there in terms of what we're seeing, what's going on that, effectively has just led to this real increase in non-human traffic. So now what I want to do is I want to pass over to our CTO and co-founder, Andy Still, who's going to discuss in more detail, what actually is this non-human traffic, what's it doing, and how's it doing it.
Thanks, Tom. So I think a good way to start would just be to look at a fairly simple definition of what non-human traffic is. And at the very simplest level, it's just any request that's made by an automated process rather than triggered by direct human action. So as we've seen, we've flagged up here on the right, there's quite a wide range of activity that non-human traffic could be doing, some of which good, some of which bad, some of which is somewhere in the middle. So just moving on, as Tom's mentioned earlier, because of the position that our product sits in, we do see the full range of traffic that's coming into your site, and this could be human, non-human, or API traffic, which sits in the middle of those two. And I think just to start picking up on the subject that we talked about slightly as we started talking about non-human traffic, it is really important to realise the wide range of types of traffic that could be determined as non-human traffic. It's quite simplistic, and you sometimes see it flagged as just good or bad bots, and that's true at the extremes. So at the good end of the spectrum, you do have things like search engine spiders, and you've got all your monitoring tools and things like that, and they're all non-human traffic, but they're all good. They're things that you would actively want to maintain on your system. At the other end, you do have the bad bots, so that's hackers out there trying to exploit vulnerabilities in your system. You've got content theft, and you've got fraudulent activity as well. All of that you would definitely want to not allow through to your system, whether you do that by completely blocking them or mitigating it in another way. But in the middle, there's a wide range of different activities that could be good or they could be bad, depending on the actual requirements of your business. So price scraping is an example of that. You know, some industries are quite comfortable with price scraping, and other industries are not so comfortable. It depends very much on what the activity of the scrapers are after they have hold of your prices. I think the other thing that is really important to remember is that we call it non-human traffic, but all non-human traffic requires a degree of human interaction at some point, and that level of human interaction is likely be determined by just how targeted that attack or interaction is. We've got sort of the likes of Amazon Echo as they increase in popularity, or the travel bots that Tom was talking about earlier, and interaction via the likes of Facebook Messenger or Slack or those sorts of tools. You'll see very, very targeted non-human traffic. So that is non-human traffic that is carrying out a very specific action on the instigation of a very particular element of human interaction. At the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got these sort of very wide-ranging automated scans that are out there scouring the internet, constantly looking for vulnerabilities within systems, and then once they identify those, they'll look to exploit those in a very specific way. But there'll be very limited human interaction in those. They'll be, once they're set off running, they'll just go about their business. Then in the middle, there is a range. So you may find that for a particular event or activity that you'll get human interaction on that. There'll be proactive human involvement to specify that activity, and then it'll be proactively monitored, and they'll be acting on the results of the non-human activity in almost real or semi-real time. Then you've got sort of scouring of sites looking for discounted tickets or discounted activities as they're advertised. So they'll then take advantage of that limited availability to try and use that for their own advantage. These will have then, that's less direct human intervention, but they're still relatively targeted, and then they will trigger human intervention at the other end. And then you've got things like price scrapers, which will have less human intervention. Again, they'll just be carrying out regular repeat scans of particular bits of content within systems. Okay, so as we've said, non-human traffic is carrying out a range of different activities, both good and bad. So what's the best way forward dealing with the traffic? So at Intechnica, we very much recommend a two-stage process. The first stage is about analysing the traffic, understanding the nature of the non-human traffic, and trying to determine what that non-human traffic is up to. Once you have a good understanding of that, you can then start looking at what actions you should take around non-human traffic. When deciding on what action you want to take to mitigate that, you need to make sure that you are maximising the value that you're getting from non-human traffic, but also that you're minimising the impact. When considering that, you do need to realise that elements can be delivering value whilst also creating a negative impact, so you have to weigh up those two alternatives against each other. And when considering the negative impact, there's a range of activities that you need to be considering. I mean, first of all, you look at the impact on other users. So is this negatively affecting the experience of your actual human users? Now, that could be in terms of the quality of service that they're getting from your system. That could be something as simple as the non-availability of products that they want to purchase, either due to non-human purchase or due to non-human reservation of those products, therefore making them unavailable for purchase by genuine consumers. Or it could be impacting the performance due to the deterioration in site response. You need to look at the impact on your company interests. So is this non-human traffic accessing your site for purposes that you would not want it to? And obvious ones there: content theft, people stealing your content to use it elsewhere for their own benefit, or it could be price analysis from competitors to enable to price check and price match against you. Then we can look at the impact of non-human traffic on system security. So is this activity trying to exploit security weaknesses in your site? And lastly, look at the impact on infrastructure. Is it affecting your infrastructure? Is it affecting the performance of your infrastructure? Are your servers reaching capacity? Is it affecting your scalability? So are you running out of disk space? Are you using extremely large amounts of cache memory or cache storage? Is your database storage starting to reach capacity? Are you having to run a much bigger system because of the overhead of maintaining this traffic? Then there is a knock-on effect, obviously, on that, often in terms of cost. So you may be serving increased bandwidth, or you may have increased storage costs and infrastructure just to run your non-human traffic infrastructure. Okay, so moving on to that, to look at from the general kinds of impact, just to some very specific types of non-human traffic that may affect particularly the travel industry. And I think in the travel industry, the sort of major amount of non-human traffic that we've been looking at is really around price scraping. So price scraping is, at its simplest level, an automated process that will be looking at a system to gather pricing information for either display or possibly for resale on other sites. As we see here, this has been identified by OWASP as one of the identified threat types of automated traffic. So looking at price scrapers through the kind of analysis that we were talking about earlier, let's look at the value you can get from price scraping. Is that price scrapers can often be gathering your information for resale or for referral from other sites. In that case, it will ultimately result in sales through your system. So there is value to be got from these systems. But what's the impact on that? So first, on other users, there's reduced performance while that prices are scraped because there will be overhead in serving that content. And also there's potential negative impact in that those prices may affect the prices that those users see, depending on how reactive your systems are to user price requests. From a business point of view, once that those prices are being rescraped, if they are being then resold via automated methods, they may be being marked up and being resold at higher prices, which is obviously affecting your the view consumers have of your pricing within the market. People are making profit that off your product without reflecting that back to you. And I think as a knock-on effect, you've no control over how they're representing what they are selling to you. They could be making promises or commitments about the service that they're selling on your behalf that you may not be able to match. And then from an infrastructure point of view, there's a lot of overhead in handling large amounts of requests in a completely unstructured and unintended manner. Okay, so now I'll just hand back over to Tom just to talk about a few of the more general industry impacts.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Andy. Hopefully that's been interesting for everyone. So just before we get into kind of the deep dive on data, I wanted to just talk about some of the impacts we're seeing within the industry. Obviously, we've seen Andy speak quite at length about price scraping and what that's doing. Essentially, what we're seeing in the travel sector and a lot of the people we're speaking to, it's very dependent on the business strategy. Some people will be absolutely fine with all of their OTAs and resellers scraping the price. Others will want to secure their customers for themselves, so they won't want that to take place. So, these are kind of general ones. We've got quite a lot of people from different types of sectors. We've got some airlines, some hotels, some OTAs on this webinar. So in terms of the general effect this is having on everyone, whether or not you do have third parties reselling your services, a lot of businesses are now seeing the more data they have leading to a competitive advantage. So the last thing you do want is your competitors scraping your prices in order to set their prices. So that's really one big effect. One thing we're seeing across everyone, no matter who they are, obviously, with such a large volume of non-human traffic, it does make these analytics skewed, so anything you use, whether it be Google Analytics, I know there's some filters in there, but no matter what kind of analytics package you're using, we can't often see the amount of non-human traffic really having an impact on the accuracy of that data. And of course, for a lot of our clients, that data is what they make their core key business day-to-day decisions based on. So, filtering out the non-human traffic and being able to exclude that from your analytics is really key to get a real key view on your actual look-to-book ratios and how you can optimize them. Because if you can't, then effectively you've got some stuff skewing your statistics there. A couple of the final ones that are very general. Content theft, obviously, there's a lot of blogging in the industry. There's a lot of people sharing different, you may have people reselling your services, which you want them to scrape all of the content and resurface that. Obviously, duplicate content is something that can be, quite often frowned upon by Google Analytics. So if your content is being reused by parties who you don't want to use it, or it's being reused too much or in the wrong way, it could have an impact on your actual business SEO. So that's another sort of angle to think of. Obviously, there's some more nefarious sort of angles to content theft, which is where people are actually, spinning up fake websites or using the content theft to resell, a competitor using your actual sort of SEO keywords against you. So content theft's a general one there. Obviously as well, given the sheer amount of traffic, and Andy will show you in a lot more depth, the impact that this has, but it does obviously, businesses are paying for this day to day in terms of performance and infrastructure. Non-human traffic does tend to be much more strenuous on systems than human traffic. So that's certainly costing you in terms of stress on the system and how much you have to serve. But also, if it is slowing down the system, it can be having a real impact on the performance for your actual, your face-to-face customers, your human traffic who actually wants to buy and buy quickly. So really important to consider, the impact that non-human traffic is having on performance and infrastructure. There is a security sort of angle to this as well. A lot of the more sophisticated security attacks coming in, things like account takeover attempts are often kind of bypass all of your typical kind of standard WAF rules, because they just look much more similar to human traffic, very hard to distinguish. And things like account takeover attempts and botnets looking much smaller in terms of their actual level and what they're doing, but slipping through your general security. So one thing to watch out for there. In terms of some more specific kind of real specific ones, depending on what sector you're in, people using GDS solutions for their bookings. Obviously, there's a cost pretty much to the amount of GDS bookings that are made. The last thing people are going to want is that cost to be driven up by non-human traffic, which is actually scraping and doesn't have a human at the end of it. The last thing we want to do is increase our costs when we're not actually standing a chance of selling anything. So certainly one to watch with in terms of those costs if you are one of the people using that. And finally, the real amalgamation of this, with people moving away from the websites, with that data being easier and easier to get in other places, there is a real impact on the business brand if customers can't go and shop with you direct. We have seen in the past a lot of complaints lobbied by various different agencies against certain, obviously not going to criticize all OTAs, but some OTAs for not having the same level of support, customer care that the customer would get if they went direct with them. So that can have a real impact on the brand. Obviously as well, if someone's not buying on your website, you do lose the opportunity to, if you're a flight provider, if you're an airline, you do lose the ability to upsell obviously the extra baggage, the the car hire and hotel and anything else, the insurance you want to sell on top of that sale. And finally, obviously, in a society where brand loyalty and customers are more fickle than ever, if they're not actually buying through your brand, that can have a real impact on loyalty if they're not constantly going to your site and they're going to an aggregator for your services. So it's one to think of. Depends very much on the business. Whether if your business is very open to pushing out as much as possible, then that's one strategy. But we do see people like Ryanair take an approach where they really want to own their customer, so they take a bit of a different approach to this. So just some stuff to think about there before we go in depth in terms of the analytics. Just one thing I did want to mention, don't forget we do have a Q&A at the end of this seminar, so if anyone does have any questions they would like to submit, please put them in that question box on your screen. We'll tackle all of them at the end, but for now I just want to hand over back to Andy Still. He's going to just discuss some data we have for multiple sites that we've monitored in the travel sector, hopefully give you some real insight into actually all the stuff we've talked about. What does it actually mean in terms of stats?
Thanks, Tom. So at this point I thought it would be interesting to move from the sort of theory that we've talked about into some actual genuine data that we've gathered. And this was gathered by Traffic Defender in front of major UK travel, based on a week in December 2016. And when we look at this, the filter that we put on was to identify all non-human traffic, which is the sort of strictest settings we have on Traffic Defender. So it's not isolating good or bad human and non-human traffic. Is about understanding the scope of all non-human traffic. So I think first easiest way to start was a nice overall figure, which just shows sort of the extent of the problem that we were seeing at this particular time. And this is a probably average level that we see, where we see here 42% of all traffic we saw during that week was identified as being non-human. We would say between 20 and 60 is fairly typical if we look at any system. So just to go in a bit more detail about how that's actually broken up over time. So you can see on the graph on the left, which is the amount of hits that we're seeing over time in total, and then on the right is where we've filtered out all the traffic that we identified as non-human traffic. As you can see on the left, there's a lot of very big spikes, and it's relatively unstructured. Certainly doesn't follow the sort of pattern you'd expect to see from typical usage, compared to that on the right, which follows a kind of pattern that you'd expect to see with regular peaks and troughs, reflecting how a standard pattern of people using the system. The graph on the left really is very, very spiky, which is clearly influenced by the amount of bot traffic coming through. So that's looking at the amount of hits. So if we move on to the next set of data, which I think is possibly even more interesting, where rather than hits, we've actually pulled out the amount of back-end processing time that we were seeing. So as you can see from the graph on the left, there is very big spikes of back-end processing time, compared to that on the right, where really there's minimal back-end processing time for most of the time. And what this illustrates really is that the non-human traffic that we're seeing is disproportionately hitting the high cost areas of the site. So this will be typically doing searches and price checking, that sort of thing, which has a lot more overhead in running in the back end. That also illustrates that what you're seeing is bot activity, which will definitely be influencing the abandonment rates and other kind of business metrics, because you get people entering the buying process, but they will likely be disproportionately not completing that. And then just moving on to just a slightly different view of this same amount of data, where what we've done here is just aggregated all the hits with and without non-human traffic. So the blue line is total, and the red line is the human traffic after it's been filtered. And we can see the top graph on total hits, which will match the pie chart that we saw earlier, showing that just under half of all the traffic is non-human traffic. And we can see below that actually the impact on processing time is massively higher, with human traffic actually only amounting for about a third of the processing time. So a third of the amount of time spent on all the server infrastructure is human traffic. 2/3 of it is actually non-human traffic. And when we look at that for the peak hour, it's an even more marked difference. And it's worth noticing that this peak hour was actually between 7 and 8 p.m, so it was a peak trading hour. It wasn't out of hours, where we see the amount of bot traffic increasing. And we can see from this graph that actually the amount of back-end processing time within that hour for non-human traffic was 97%, with human traffic therefore only applying for 3% of the overhead on those servers during that time. As we said, this is not necessarily all bad non-human traffic. Some of this may be genuine resellers, and they will be passing value back onto the end result, but it just illustrates that it is a major element of the amount of traffic that we see during peak time. Okay, so that gives us an insight into some of the problems and the extent of the problem we're seeing, but what sort of solutions can we put in place to try and mitigate some of this impact? I think when we start looking at solutions, the first point is it is really important to remember that identifying, stopping, mitigating non-human traffic, it's not an easy challenge. Fundamentally, it is very difficult to identify non-human traffic. It isn't an exact science because there is no difference between a request made by a human and requests made by a non-human. You need to look into a lot more around what it's doing and how it's doing it to determine that. At a technical level, there is no difference. So I think the most basic level of prevention that can be put in place is a sort of static blocking approach. This could be on your firewall or your web application firewall, or within your application or CDN or other elements such as that, where you just maintain a blacklist of known IP addresses or known user agents for non-human traffic that you have seen in the past or that you have gathered from elsewhere, and you can then block that traffic. Now there are a few downsides to this. First is that there is a maintenance task in maintaining that list, particularly if you're looking at just using IP addresses. IP addresses used by non-human traffic will change constantly, be constantly evolving, so you need to stay on top of that. Similarly, user agents are very easy to fake, and new ones will be evolving or changing all the time, so you need to stay on top of that. And you need to look at this across the industry rather than just from ones that you will see yourself, to make sure that you're getting benefit of everyone else's experience as well as your own. And just to illustrate how this relates to how much we would have identified in the data set that we looked earlier, just using standard blacklists, we probably would have identified around about 1% of that data. Again, that may be more as we start to bring more and more industry knowledge into that, but that we'll always be playing catch up by using that kind of method for identifying the traffic. The next method that's worth considering is actually serving cache content, and this could be cache content to everyone, or this could be cache content just non-human traffic. So if you identify non-human traffic, you serve content that's not quite as real-time as you would be seeing. This may or may not be feasible. If your system relies entirely on real-time pricing, it may not be possible to serve cache content. And the other downside is that you could actually affect revenue because of the non-human traffic. Could be legitimate reselling, in which case you're serving out-of-date pricing, which may affect user satisfaction with your system ongoing. If they're using resellers and then they're hitting your site and being given different prices to that we were expecting, they'll probably be unhappy with that level of service. So again, we sort of looked at the impact that would have had in the data set that we've looked at earlier on today. And you can see from this diagram, the red area is the amount of hits on the left and back end processing time on the right that would have been saved by serving cache content. As you can see, in some areas there's certainly a saving to be made, so there would be certainly a beneficial impact from introducing this. This could be increased if you were sort of depending on the level of caching, so it depends how aggressively you were caching. You could probably make some more savings, but again, it's that balancing act that we talked about here. But as you can see from here, it's a saving, but it's certainly not the majority of traffic that would be covered. Another way is actually by looking at rate limiting, and this is about just reducing the amount of requests that can be served from particular IPs, user agents, ranges of IP addresses on certain calls, API calls or page requests. So the obvious advantage to this is it will reduce the amount of overhead there is on the infrastructure. This could be set up to vary depending on things like time of day or the level of stress that the infrastructure is under. This will make a difference. It will reduce the overhead on your infrastructure, but there is a downside in that what you're doing by rate limiting is probably disrupting the amount of revenue that you will see coming in from the genuine traffic. So in some ways it will disproportionately punish genuine traffic whilst allowing the sort of bad bots that you may want to block to also get some content. You will see the fact with this, everyone will get some content and possibly no one will get all the content they're looking for. So it's maybe not an ideal solution from that point of view. And the other point is that canny bot operators will actually just quickly adapt to this and find ways around it. Okay, so I think just moving on to the next level one, which is really looking at, you could do changes to your application to try and mitigate for this. So this could be setting limits on what people, anonymous users can do and what people with accounts can do. So sort of the amount of searches and things like that. This again can be successful, but it can also lead to people creating fake accounts, automated traffic creating fake accounts, or even worse, compromising genuine accounts and misusing those, so affecting real users. You could also look at putting capture processing on searches. Again, it will have some beneficial impact, but you do need to be careful about the impact on genuine users, because capture can lead to dissatisfied users and it will slow down the general process of using, so you may have negative impact from that. And I think when we look at all those different kinds of approaches you can put in, the last one really is about looking at more proactive traffic analysis. And this is about getting a much better understanding of what kind of traffic is coming through your system. So looking at more than individual requests, looking at the nature of the requests and the different pattern of requests that are being made. You can then be doing sort of intelligent machine-based learning algorithms to identify exactly what that traffic is up to and how it relates to standard legitimate traffic through your system, and you can make decisions on how to handle that traffic much more intelligently from that. Once you've got that sort of information, you can start looking at adaptive management techniques. That could be a combination of some of the things that we've looked at above. It could be blocking, it could be sending traffic to different systems depending on the nature of the traffic. So serving your non-human traffic from a special system, returning cut down content if necessary. You can also look at putting honeypot traps into that as well to make sure that the traffic you feel is human is genuinely human. Okay, so just to summarize as we're moving towards the end of the time we've got today, I think first of all it's important to identify that non-human traffic is a problem within the travel industry. As we've seen within the data today, it's taking up a large amount of the actual traffic that's coming and hitting systems. Obviously that's creating a lot of overhead on the servers, so there's infrastructure costs, but you've got people using that for reasons that you may or may not feel is in your company interest. So they could be reselling prices, using prices or increasing prices without your consent. It is impacting on the public image of companies as well. As we've seen at the end, there's no simple solution to that problem. Not all bots are good or bad. You need to understand what the bots are doing, you need to understand the extent of the problem, and then you need to come up with a management solution that will make sure that you're maximising the value you're seeing, but minimising the impact. Some of those basic solutions that you can implement will have positive impact, but you need to be aware that there is also a potential negative impact on your users from some of those. And it's important to look beyond the basic solutions at the more proactive learning solutions, so you can more accurately identify the traffic and come up with a better way of mitigating that traffic. Okay, I'll just hand back over now to Tom.
Fantastic, thanks. So yeah, we're just going to move into the Q&A in a second. We do have some questions already, but yeah, if you do have any questions off the back of what was shown, please do drop them in that question box. We'll get around to them. Just before we do that, it kind of piggybacks onto one of the questions. What can you do? What do we do? So as I said, we're working in that space. You've seen the kind of level of insight you can get. One thing we would recommend everyone do, be it with us or another party, would be to try and get some visibility into what's going on before they move any further. So understand how much of their traffic is non-human, and how much of it is human, and then what is the impact of that is really key for any modern sort of travel business. We do offer free bot audits, so if anyone would like to do that, what we do in that is we conduct a free audit. We can do that via a number of different methods, be it inline or out of line, and we can audit your traffic and give you a report, give you a demonstration of how much of it is human, how much of it is non-human, what is the impact of that, what do the patterns look like, and what is the effect. So if anyone would like to sort of get a bit more information in terms of what their traffic looks like, do contact us. We are running a number of traffic audits for a number of people in the sector at the moment to give them some visibility. But without further ado, I just want to jump onto the questions. We've got a question here from Juliana. They said, what can we put in place in our system to detect non-human traffic? I think I'd pass that on to you, Andy.
Okay, so I think as you said, it's not a sort of easy thing to identify, and I think I was going to think if there's the only way you can really do that really is by having a system that will capture all the data, all the requests that are being made to your system. And then you need to proactively analyse those sorts of things and look for unusual patterns and unusual request patterns that are going in there. It is around patterns of behaviour as well. It's not around individual requests. You can look at a combination of all the data that you get back about requests and then really look at what you would expect to be going on in that situation and what you find unusual. So this is the sort of thing that we look at in our traffic audits. We look at standard known attack vectors that come in from non-human traffic, and also we would look at normal expected usage and identify the difference between those two.
Yeah, and obviously, so it is a very difficult thing to get to grips with. There's a number of sort of things out there you can do, but yeah, really what you're looking to do is get a solution that can look at all of the information that you've got coming in, all of the traffic, analyze that, and really it needs to sort of, would be looking for patterns in that traffic to identify non-human traffic and the sort of behavioural characteristics of that before giving you back. So great question. Hopefully that answers it. But if you do have any more questions, do drop them in. We've got a couple more from some other people. The first one was someone here says that they handle a lot of their own, they handle a lot of their third parties through API. So they handle in their third parties through APIs. Do they suspect that they'll still have non-human traffic? Do they suspect that that could be an issue for them, and will it stop the non-human traffic on their site?
Thanks, Tom. Good question. And I think, again, this will vary a lot depending on the nature of your traffic and the APIs that you've got available. And if they are public APIs, there is a fairly good chance that they will be hit by non-human traffic. And whether or not that is a concern will, again, depend on the nature of the information that you're giving out over that API. If it's a public API and the information you're happy to share, this may not be a problem. If it's not, then again, you need to look at the impact of the non-human traffic hitting your API in that way, and also obviously the overhead of running that API. I mean, we would look at considering the same sort of considerations that we would for web-based systems. You need to start, if you're genuinely concerned about the amount of non-human traffic, there's a number of approaches that you can take to mitigate it. This could be by putting extra protection around your API and limiting the amount of requests that people can make, or certainly by tracking the amount of requests that people can make will be give you a big degree of insight into whether that's legitimate or non-legitimate use. With APIs, I think it's always a good idea to consider not making them completely open, but making them opt-in, and then you can track who's making those requests. But in some situations, obviously that's not possible, and you need to have these open. And in that case, I would recommend giving it the same amount of consideration as a web-based system, just to make sure that you're not, your API is not being abused by people you don't want it to, or being used in ways that you've not expected it to.
Okay, great. We've got another question come in here in terms of in what layer does our product, but I think we'll try and answer this in a general kind of, rather than talking specific, we don't want to be too much of a pitch, but in what layer would our product sit with respect to sort of general infrastructure, things like CDN and DDoS? I think it's worth just touching on this from a different sort of angle. So our solution's pretty agnostic. It can sit in front or behind of any layer, and it can also sit as an outer layer as well, so not necessarily an inline solution. I think for anything to have a real impact on what's going on, it's dependent on the business is what I would say. So if you are going to sit behind a WAF, obviously the amount of information that you capture on the traffic, some of it will be filtered out. If you're sitting behind DDoS layer, that will be captured out further. However, that's typically where places sit, because what we're talking about in our solution is not necessarily the security aspect of this, but all the other types of non-human traffic that are going on. So the stuff that's being missed by your typical WAF and DDoS. There is a flip side to that, and obviously there's an advantage of sitting in front of the CDN. Obviously people do pay bandwidth costs, and there's some argument to say that CDNs are very happy about all the level of non-human traffic going on out there, because effectively that non-human traffic's increasing bandwidth, increasing hits on the site. So if someone did have a specific amount of non-human traffic that they were filtering out, that there is an option to go in front of that CDN to reduce those bandwidth costs if it's hitting them there. So I think ideally our recommendation would really to be behind that obvious kind of non-human traffic that gets blocked by your WAF and security, your WAF and your DDoS. But potentially if it's affecting you at a CDN layer level, you could go in front of that CDN. I think it's all about a case-by-case implementation. I don't know what you think, Andy.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think when looking at all these sort of things, it's about understanding what that layer is there for and what benefit you're getting from it, and whether that is being affected disproportionately or negatively by the non-human traffic. Typically, CDNs are sat there with the ability to handle large amounts of traffic and deliver the layer of optimization and caching that they do. They're designed to be the first point of contact for your users, so they have minimal overhead and latency back to the users. So typically we'd say that would be the best place for them to sit, and a product like ours would sit behind that. But as Tom said, there are arguments to do it the other way, and from a company point of view, we have had clients who have equally happily taken both approaches.
Yeah, and I just want to, if anyone has any final questions, we'll try and end a little bit early, just to give everyone a little, it's been exactly as long as we thought it would be, so we'll try and end a little bit early. Just one final question that's just come in, just on the legal stance. Do they think this problem can be tackled on a legal level? So the question essentially, how do we tackle bots legally? I think that's interesting. Do you want to take a look? I think I've got some opinions on that, but I don't know if you want to take a stab at that first, Andy.
Yeah, I can do. And I think for me, it's a two-pronged approach. And I think similar, if you think about tackling many problems legally, you want that legal position to be clear and you want that deterrent to be in place. But by the point that the time you get into the point you want to exercise that legal right, often the damage has already been done or is in the process of being done. So you do want to mitigate that at the time. And another aspect to that is when you're looking at legal recourse, you do need to be able to gather a reasonable amount of data, to prove that that activity has in fact happened. And I think these sort of systems will help you in gathering that data as well as mitigating the impact of it.
Yeah, sure. I think, we do a lot of work in the ticketing space where this is a real hot legal topic, specifically with touting. I think one thing we've seen as a legal precedent there is that businesses did need a layer in to try and prevent this, and some very clear T's and C's so that people conducting things that would be seen as illegal were very much in breach of something and very obviously in breach of something there. So a couple of bits there for me. I think to just sort of relay on what Andy said, certainly having a solution that allows you to audit this so that you can give some real good evidence if you do want to take a business to court. Having very clear T's and C's on your website, this is something everyone can do, a little bit of free advice, but having some very clear T's and C's on the website about what they do want to allow and what they don't, that's not something for us to sell as a product, but something anyone can go out there and do and look at the T's and C's on the site, get a legal department to do that for them, and then have a layer in there that acts as a something that those people have to get around if they need to get around it, so there is a clear deterrent and that they're really in breach of that. I think it's the legal stance is a very interesting one. There's obviously a lot of people actually, Craigslist obviously making quite a bit of money out of that now. But one thing I would say is it's a very reactive approach to the problem. So we'd certainly say it's part of it, something that everyone should be looking at. But we'd say do that in terms of being proactive as well and trying to manage that non-human traffic in the forefront with solutions. Would be a recommendation from us. That's pretty much it for questions we've got. If anyone does have any more questions, please do feel free to fire them over. I'm more than happy to respond to anyone via email. But I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Hopefully the information you've been given has been very useful. Hopefully give you a bit of insight into what we're seeing in the travel industry in terms of non-human traffic. More than happy to give everyone some deep insight into their actual specific websites with one of those free traffic audits. So if you do want one of those, please do get in touch. I'd just like to sort of finish by thanking everyone for joining us today. Hopefully everyone has a great rest of the day, enjoys their evenings and days. And I'd like to thank you, Andy, for joining us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.